Auburn gets out of week 1 with a big win over Georgia Southern. Now it's time to turn the page to week 2. They go to Death Valley to play Clemson, so obviously a much more difficult matchup. James Crepea joins me now from the Plains to discuss this matchup between Auburn and Clemson, the defending national champions. And we'll start with the offense as a whole. Not quite what we expected, I guess, coming out of the gates from Jarrett Stidham, the offensive line, the offensive unit as a whole. So the question here is, how can this offensive line protect Jarrett Stidham? Obviously, a lot of mistakes, especially in the first half, 3 turnovers, and then you have to look at the pressure. He was really being pressured throughout much of the football game. So what is the expectation there against a much more stout defense from Clemson?
No question. So first and foremost, you have to look at the experience that Auburn has back on the offensive line. Most of that is on the right side. Starting at the center with Austin Golson, he's a returning starter. Braden Smith, obviously, also a returning starter. Darius James, a returning starter. That's all the right side of the line. The issues where Auburn was facing difficulty, in particular with the pressures on Stidham, the sack that led to a fumble and the touchdown for Georgia Southern came on the left side. That was Mike Horton missing an assignment. Prince Tegas, a first-year starter at left tackle. They have to work on communication issues. That's what Malzahn said today. That's what we're going to be looking at to see is the left side of that line. How much does Clemson look to exploit the left side of Auburn's offensive line? Particularly, you've got one of the better defensive linemen in the country, Christian Wilkins at Clemson. Where does he look to line up? How much do they put him on the left side in particular to really capitalize on that? And how much of a improvement do we see from week 1 to week 2 on the left side of Auburn's offensive line? Because neither one of those guys are starters. Yes, they got experience. Both Prince Tega and Mike Horton both got experience last year, but they are now going to be facing by far the biggest test that they faced to date.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, the defense from Auburn came out and played really well, had a great game against Georgia Southern. So the question there, going up against Clemson, a new quarterback in Clemson, how do they match up against this Tigers offense?
Well, certainly Clemson is replacing a lot of skill position players from a year ago. It goes without saying that Deshaun Watson is not there. Now you have Kelly Bryant. You hear about similar skill sets, but let's slow down before we start comparing anybody to Deshaun Watson. I mean, he was a freak athlete at that size, and let's not take away from what he was able to accomplish, certainly at Clemson. Mike Williams was an unbelievable receiver. They do have Deion Kane as well, not the same kind of player. Kane is, I think, a little bit faster, frankly, than Williams was, but he was a very productive receiver. At running back, I think is really more where C.J. Fuller is trying to fill in for Wayne Gallman. We'll see how productive he is by comparison, but ultimately, Clemson is not going to win or lose the game against Auburn because of how C.J. Fuller plays. It's going to be up to Kelly Bryant. It's going to be up to Deion Kane in particular. And frankly, Clemson's offensive line is replacing parts as well. Just as much as Auburn has experience on the right side, has returning starters, has 2 graduate transfers on the 2 deep as well, Clemson has to replace starters on the right side. They're still trying to settle in at a right tackle. So you saw Auburn's defensive line really take advantage of Georgia Southern in week 1, really outperform any expectations that one could have against a triple option team. Different style of attack, no question, but with Clemson's offensive line replacing the right tackle, an opportunity for Auburn's defensive line to capitalize as well.
Yeah, great analysis and breakdown there, James. Looking at Kerryon Johnson, another factor, moving factor in the backfield for Auburn, hurting his hamstring, obviously, in game 1. Somewhat of a concern. Gus Malzahn not really giving us much information today during the press conference. What do we know about this injury, and how big of an impact if he is not ready to go against Clemson this Saturday?
Well, you know, it was enough to knock him out of Saturday's game with Georgia Southern. It was serious enough to do that. It was serious enough to be considered a lower hamstring injury by Auburn radio during Saturday's broadcast. Kerryon, when he came off the field, yes, he came off on his own power, but he did not bend his right knee whatsoever. Those are all not terribly good signs when you talk about somebody trying to return just a week later. Yes, Malzahn doesn't give much, and he never does, and he never will by way of injury. So the fact that he says they're hopeful, that's a generic statement that he has said many times before, and players have been out for several weeks. I would be personally very surprised if Kerryon Johnson were to play this Saturday. I just think that the injury is probably just too severe to get him back just this quickly. But nevertheless, they do get Cameron Petway back from his suspension. That's somebody who they didn't have a week ago. That's obviously a massive boost to the running back core. And Cam Martin is coming off, you know, arguably the best game of his career. I know it wasn't a career high in yards, but it was a career high against FBS teams, and he really showcased his skills quite a bit against Georgia Southern. So Petway and Martin, and yes, Malik Miller and Devin Barrett also in the mix there. If Kerryon's not able to go, Auburn still has plenty of depth. certainly has somebody very different, probably more durable in Cameron Petway, but I would not expect Kerryon Johnson to go this weekend.
Yeah, Kerryon Johnson has had his fair share of battling those injuries, especially with the ankle from last season as well. So certainly, hopefully, we'll get him back in the lineup and in depth. You know, a good thing for the Auburn Tigers in the backfield. Thank you so much, James, for your time. Greatly appreciate it. Safe travels to Clemson this Saturday. For all your Auburn Tiger updates, you can visit us on AL.com.